I haven't been involved specifically in church planting in the U.S., but I have watched how it goes, and I've watched the perspective, I've watched the language around it, and just us in general. When we think of church in America, the first thing that comes to mind is a church building, right, where Christians assemble on Sunday, and that is church. And when we think about, honestly, most people, I think, when they think about planning a church, the first thing they think about is, let's go get a building where people can come together and meet, and we're going to call that building the church. And I don't want to make it sound, I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's almost like that building is what we're planting, and we're just trying to get people to come and support that. Whereas planting the gospel takes the building out of it. It talks about impacting people's lives with the gospel. Do you think, am I seeing that correctly? Is that kind of a perspective maybe that we need to have a little bit of a shift on here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and we've even planted churches that way, where we get a space, a physical space, and we put chairs, line them up in rows. We've got a pulpit, we've got a stage.
As soon as we get those chairs full, we've been successful.
Yeah, we've been successful. And, you can plan a church without ever making disciples. But you cannot make disciples and multiply disciples without it resulting in a church. And so I think we often pursue something, yet we never end up at the place where we want to end up. Let's get a building, let's fill it full of people, because then we're doing God's work. And that's not to say preaching and teaching and worshiping God on Sunday isn't God's work.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, the Great Commission brings an incumbency upon each one of us to be making disciples. And when we seek to simply fill a building and develop programs, we professionalize and privatize, really, the work that really every one of us should be involved in, which is sharing the gospel, living out the gospel, and helping others do the same. Mm-hmm. And so, I completely agree. I think we have to be careful and not, just like you said, not to be flippant about the buildings and the structures. Sure. There is a place for that, but we can't, mix things up and think we're accomplishing God's work by filling a building.
Right. So. Well, from my perspective, being raised in the church in the South, I'm 52 years old. I've been in church all my life. There is this idea that going to church is the main thing Christians do, right? If you're a Christian, you go to church. And what we're trying to get people to think about is, yes, you need a body of believers to associate with, to be encouraged by, to exhort one another, and all those different things that go with church. But that is not what Christianity really is about, is attending a church service, right? We want people to understand that once they leave church, that's really when Christianity should begin. I think if I were to go start a church today, or if a particular denomination were to come to Westmoreland and start a church, honestly, I think most of who they would be looking for are existing Christians, at least people who claim Christ, to come and participate with them in what they're doing. There seems to be a lot less focus on truly making disciples. What you said about when you make disciples, you kind of have to have a church. It's just a different starting point, which I think helps shift the perspective for me personally, and hopefully for other people, just to shift the idea away from it's all about church, right? Church is a piece and an important piece, but it's much broader than that. My whole growing up life, you just hear so many people, their evangelism essentially consists of this. Well, I invited them to church, right? And, we want people to move away from that to taking on that responsibility of actually leading others to Christ, taking on the responsibility to disciple people. And that's what you're explaining here. I mean, you're talking about making disciples that then go make other disciples.